I want to begin today's news by recognizing the passing of Bob Dole, just a great American in every sense of the world. The New York Times obit begins, Bob Dole, the plain-spoken son of the prairie, who overcame Dust Bowl deprivation in Kansas and grievous battle wounds in Italy to become the Senate Majority Leader and the last of the World War II generation to win his party's nomination for president, died on Sunday. He was 98. A Republican, Mr. Dole was one of the most durable political figures in the last decades of the last century. He was nominated for vice president in 1976 and then for president a full 20 years later. He spent a quarter century in the Senate, where he was his party's longest-serving leader until Mitch McConnell, the Kentucky senator now in that job, surpassed the record in June of 2018. As old soldiers of World War II faded away, Mr. Dole, who had been a lieutenant in the Army's storied 10th Mountain Division, and was wounded so severely on a battlefield that he was left for dead, came to personify the resilience of the generation. In his post-political career, he devoted himself to raising money for the World War II Memorial in Washington and spent weekends there welcoming visiting veterans. In one of his last public appearances in December of 2018, Bob Dole joined the line at the Capitol Rotunda where the body of former President George H.W. Bush, an erstwhile political rival and fellow World War II veteran, lay in state. As an aide helped him up from his wheelchair, Mr. Dole, using his left hand because his right hand had been rendered useless by the war, saluted the flag-draped coffin of the last president to have served in World War II. A great man saluting a great man. He will be missed, a great American. Bob Dole, dead at the age of 98. We should all live such lives of significance, purpose, and good humor. The coronavirus vaccine demand grew over the weekend. Good. Americans are waking up to the fact that this is the best protection they have. We don't need lockdowns. We don't need band-aids. We don't need school closures. Adults and now children, if they haven't had the virus, need to get the vaccine. And they need to get the booster when they are eligible. The very best plans, of course, adopt for a mutation that renders those vaccines obsolete. And the U.S. is planning, according to the Wall Street Journal, to fast-track revamped COVID-19 vaccines. Good. How scary is Omicron? Yesterday's story by Carolyn Johnson and Joel Achenbach in the Washington Post is the very best story. The answer is we will know in about 10 days. It could be not scary at all, or it could be terrifying. It's spreading fast, but it could be a mere mild version of Delta. It may also, and this is the dark side, we don't know, target children far more viciously than the previous varieties of coronavirus have. We do not know. We will know. If you want to read all of the good science, go to my Twitter feed at Hugh Hewitt. Scroll down, and I linked the Carolyn Johnson and Joel Achenbach piece. Why didn't the U.S. detect Omicron cases sooner? It doesn't matter. There are going to be more variants. That was the New York Times, spent this much paper on that. I didn't even bother reading it. Doesn't matter. It's here. Doesn't matter who messed up or if anyone messed up. The data on Omicron severity is encouraging, according to Dr. Fauci. And I don't really believe much of Dr. Fauci anymore, but I don't think he would dare risk another major error in his presentation. In political news, former Senator David Perdue is indeed going to challenge Brian Kemp in Georgia in the primary. Georgia Joe called us and told us that on Friday, and I was unaware of that, and I doubted it was correct, but Georgia Joe was correct. Big story on Kamala Harris this weekend as the staff exodus continues. If I were Senator now Vice President Harris and trying to recover a lost political momentum, study Ukraine and China. I mean, just bring in every expert you can. I hope to have Frank Dowes join us, a Ukraine expert from Europe, late in the show, and be ready to talk coherently about Ukraine when it is invaded by Russia. Michigan schools order an investigation after staff alarms about the suspect who killed so many last week was raised hours before the shooting. A lot of malpractice by school officials. We'll get to the bottom of that. Many stories about the looming win by pro-life forces in Roe and Casey being overturned. Pay no attention to it. We don't know what's going to happen. I think it will be 6-3, but we don't know what's going to happen. Alabama, Michigan, Georgia, and Cincinnati made the college playoff. That's as it should be. Long story on what is driving Putin's Ukraine brinkmanship in the New York Times, and the answer is ambition. He wants to restore Greater Russia. That's not really that hard. In the Wall Street Journal, exclusive, China seeks its first military base on Africa's Atlantic coast, in Equatorial Guinea. We've got to be very worried about China going into the new year. Pope Francis visited Greek razor wire fence migrant camp and urged the world to open their hearts to migrants. That's when he's at his best, when he's visiting the lost and the least and urging people to be generous. The French conservatives have nominated a woman, Valérie Pécresse. I butcher every French name I've ever come across, and so I'm not sure if Valérie Pécresse is correct, but she's formidable. She could win. Nicola Sturgeon, the separatist Scots, is under trouble for apparently giving all of her business to Deloitte. And on Syria's ruins, a new drug empire flourished. This was a very disturbing story this weekend. Have you ever even heard of a brand new, powerful stimulant, amphetamine, coming out, Captacon, being manufactured by the gazillions in Syria and spreading around the world? North Korea heads into a tense winter, closed borders and food supplies in question. Pray for the people of North Korea. They're going to starve to death because of that crazy man running that regime. All that and more, but coming back from the break, I'm going to talk with Michael Schellenberger. He's the author of a brand new book, San Francisco. San Francisco is in bookstores now. I encourage you to get it and read it. I encourage you to listen to this interview. It's over at my podcast. I talked to him on Friday after the show. And anyone who cares about the homeless people they pass on the street, before you give anyone another dollar or you write a check to anyone other than Salvation Army and Catholic Charities to care for the homeless, you've got to read or at least listen to Michael Schellenberger on San Francisco and why giving money to the homeless agencies of San Francisco is actually making it worse. They've got it exactly wrong. They're encouraging drug dependency. They're encouraging crime. They're doing it exactly the wrong way. Welcome back, America. Salena Zito is from Yinzerland. She is my regular Monday morning guest. I'll come back to Michael Schellenberger and his wonderful new book, San Francisco. But I got to talk to my friend Salena. The Steelers did the Browns a good turn last night. They beat the Ravens when the Ravens went for two. Salena, I know you're not watching the Steelers, but I very rarely have anything good to say about Big Ben and the Steelers, so I had to do that. Tell me why you are writing about horses and bourbon this morning.
Good morning. So my stories are called The Middle of Somewhere because I find everywhere in this country, interesting. I don't think anywhere in this country is the middle of nowhere. So I'm down in Kentucky and I see this gorgeous farm and I start doing some, investigations, and this farm is owned by Guinness McFadden, and if anybody is a Derby lover, they will know that he owned the horse Country House that won in 2019 with 65-1 odds, and came in second place, only for the first place to be eliminated, and Country House became the winner of the Derby and made history because, first of all, because of the odds, 65-1. I mean, usually win the Derby was 65-1, and also the longest reigning winner of the Derby because of the pandemic in 2020, and it being the longest wait between crowns. So he's trying to figure out what his next thing is to do, and he decides on Kentucky's other sort of signature event in the state, and that was to make bourbon. And so he started his own bourbon company, and that's why I'm writing about bourbon.
Now, Salena, I'm not much of a drinker. When I do, I will have a bit of Talisker or a single malt from Scotland, but a lot of people are very much into bourbon, and this is a new thing. Right? This is the craft bourbon is a new thing. Why is it taken up? Is it part of the millennial need to differentiate from their parents?
Well, I think bourbon is fascinating. It's so very much, it's very American. Right? Bourbon was created because the government pushed the farmers out of Pennsylvania during the Whiskey Rebellion, And they're like, well, we're getting away from this country. So they went to Kentucky, which was a territory. And they still grew their corn, and they still had excess corn, and they still put that corn in the barrel. What made bourbon is they put the corn in this barrel, and it traveled down the Mississippi or around Florida and up to the East Coast. But when it got there, it was a little bit different because the barrels were charred, and the aging process between point A to point B had given us this very unique flavor, this very unique taste, and that's how we got bourbon. And bourbon. Go ahead.
What is the McFadden brand?
It's called Black. Oh my goodness, I'm going to forget.
Blackwood Stables. That's
Thank
his
you.
stable.
Sorry.
Why?
Didn't have enough coffee this morning. Yeah,
it's in your article, but I thought that might be his stables, and not sure it was his bourbon brand. Blackwood Stables.
Bourbon, yeah, Blackwood Stables toasted bourbon.
So what does he say is unique about it? I haven't tried it, obviously. What do you think about it?
Well, it has all these. It's very complex, which is a characteristic of bourbon. But when you have it, it has all these sort of different tastes that sort of come up after you have been sipping on it, and that's what makes it incredibly unique and very different. You know, bourbon.
Well, to everybody out there, go get your Blackwood Stables bourbon. I have to ask Salena Zito about Bob Dole, because for a political reporter of our generation, he has been there at the center of everything for so long. Did you ever have a chance to sit down and talk with him, Salena?
Oh yeah, definitely. Senator Dole was a giant. You know, the thing that people miss, and I think has been coming out and the accolades and talking about him, was his razor wit. I mean, he was really funny, and he had this very Kansas-like attitude. And one of the things I really liked about Dole is that he brought Kansas with him. Whatever part of his life, whatever he achieved, wherever he took service to this country, he never left Kansas behind. And that's sort of what made him unique when he went to Washington. And now, you
don't think of him as a joke teller. When you say wit, you mean the repartee that came with talking to Bob Dole. Who else has that now? I have a couple of nominees, but who do you think has that now?
Oh, wow. Joe Manchin has a great wit if you sit and talk with him.
I've never done that, so I don't know. I will tell you straight out, Mike Pompeo is a funny guy. With this in this category, in terms of sticking it in, just cutting your throat and not knowing it. Salena Zito does that too, but she's always smiling. That's the dangerous thing about Salena Zito. Everything Salena is available at salenazito.com, including her latest column on Blackwood Stables bourbon. Thank you, Salena. Come right back. More of Michael Schellenberger and San Francisco ahead. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, live inside the Beltway, where last night Joni Mitchell and others were honored at the Kennedy Center Honors. Joni Mitchell, one of my favorites. I think I played Court and Spark about 1,000 times when I was a freshman in college. She's a terrific American artist. Programming note, I will be appearing on Special Report with Bret Baier tonight. First time I've ever been on Special Report. My thanks to a long and good run with Chuck Todd and John Reese at Meet the Press. I'm back being a free agent in anticipation of the 2023-24 debate cycle. So, kicking off tonight on Special Report with Bret Baier. Joined now by Jake Sherman. If you haven't read Punchbowl News this morning, you should, because it's going to be quite the closing sprint in Washington, D.C., and Punchbowl News will keep you up to speed with what is happening on the Hill. Good morning, Jake.
Good morning, Hugh. I apologize for missing you earlier this morning. It was a little bit of chaos in the Sherman house, but I'm happy to be back with you.
Not a problem at all. In fact, it gives us a chance to tell a different audience, because the average time spent listening is about 35 minutes, that Punchbowl News is absolutely indispensable if you want to know what's going on inside of Washington, D.C. every morning. And you gave a good overview of where we stand. Now, Jake, I want to begin with a specific. There is in the House version of the Build Back Better bill $170 billion for affordable housing and homeless aid. I've spent much of the show today replaying my interview from Friday's podcast with Michael Schellenberger, the author of San Francisco, Why Progressives Ruin City. He's a man of the left. He studied homelessness in Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, and L.A. It would be a disaster. The problem will only get worse if that money is passed by the Senate. Where is the Build Back Better version of the bill right now in the Senate, Jake Sherman?
Well, a few things to note. I have to imagine that housing money will be in there. That's very important to progressives, and very little, as we've discussed, very little is going to change in the Senate. But here's what I would say: Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin are both saying, both of them, that they don't believe this bill is going to pass until 2022, and that's all. 2022, and that's all you need to know, because they are the key here. And if whatever they say goes, I would say that is as simple as it is. So at some point, pretty soon, Chuck Schumer is going to have to contend with that reality and kind of wrap his head around what's next. Now, on the other hand, there's a lot of uncertainty about what will end up in this bill. Number one, the immigration provisions here are just very uncertain at this point, and I have to imagine that in the next couple of days, maybe a week, we will hear from the parliamentarian, the nonpartisan kind of balls and strikes arbiter of what can be in a reconciliation bill about what could go in. So that is kind of what we're looking at this week when it comes to BBB.
Now, the reason I might have to disagree with you about BBB's housing and affordable aid and homelessness aid, Jake, is that there's a news cycle happening about the massive crime wave on the West Coast. It's hard to ignore. A lot of it has got nothing to do with the homeless. A lot of it does have a lot to do with organized gangs and the George Soros prosecutors, Chesa Boudin and others in L.A. and other cities. And if they don't change the language that Nancy Pelosi put into BBB, the homeless money can't go to people like the Salvation Army and Catholic Charities who know what they're doing. It goes to ideological groups. I can't imagine Manchin wants that. Has anyone been talking about this?
No, because his main issue is not housing. I mean, here's what I would say: Manchin can only have a couple of main issues, and his main issues so far have been environmental provisions, big entitlement programs, things of that nature. Paid leave, which he's against in this bill. Those are his main issues, and I think if you're reading the tea leaves, if he starts picking fights on every issue, he's not going to get what he wants on any issue. So I think that is his tactic right now. But I mean, listen, whatever Manchin says, I hate to say this, I don't mean to oversimplify or to be glib. Whatever Manchin says goes. That's just kind of the reality of it.
No, I believe that. But isn't it also true that whatever any Democratic senator says goes, or the bill doesn't go? So if any of them read Schellenberger or know what the homeless situation is or what that $170 billion will do, and it will make things worse, they can change the language, they can change the program. If even one of them get it.
True. Yes, very true. If one of them decide that they don't like it, they can stop it. That's absolutely true.
And I don't want them to stop it. I just want them to change the conditions. One of the conditions Nancy Pelosi attached is that no money can go to home-to-work programs, which is the ideological bête noire of the left in San Francisco. They hate to make people do anything in receipt of their money. And have you noticed, Jake, these stories coming out of the West Coast? The LA Times ran a big story yesterday. It's metastasizing.
Yes, I have read all those stories. It's a massive problem. I haven't read the book yet, although it's been getting a lot of ears and eyeballs, so to speak. It's been all over the place. But no, I have read those stories. I've not read the book.
And what I think matters is when middle-class voters become afraid to go to the mall and afraid to eat in a restaurant for fear of organized bands of looters that will not be prosecuted. In fact, they arrested 17 people on Saturday. They were out on Saturday night on no bail. That all of a sudden Congress people begin to know. Dianne Feinstein's staff might notice, although she doesn't have much in this game anymore, and I don't think the new senator really knows where the bathrooms are yet. I would look to people like Angus Keene and Chris Coons to step up. Have any of them got their own pet peeves, by the way?
Not really. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, a lot of these senators are just trying to get the bill across the finish line, and they're not picking fights at this point. And there's something to be said about that as a good strategy and as a bad strategy, because they could extract what they want. But I will remember, this bill goes back to the House of Representatives, and the House of Representatives is going to be very, very sensitive to big changes made in it. But that doesn't mean people shouldn't have opinions. But I think Democrats are beginning to feel the pressure to get something done and get something done quickly, and that is what's driving.
Well, I think they're feeling the pressure of these polls. Have you seen? Yeah. Did you see Spanberger out there denouncing the bill she voted for? How many people are Elaine Luria doing the same thing? How many people are out there who are kind of level-headed Democrats who realize they signed their death warrant?
I think a lot of them are,
political death
I think
warrant.
Yes, political. Yes, I think a lot of them recognize that, and I think a lot of them, frankly, that's what's going to make it difficult when it gets back to the House. I mean, if they truly feel like they've made a mistake at this point, I don't know that they actually feel that, or they're trying to muddle the message about their support. If they truly feel like they've made a mistake, they do have another opportunity on this bill. 100%. It's going to change in the Senate. They can stop it in the House of Representatives. They can if they wanted to. I'm not cheerleading for them to do so, but they do have the ability. If you're a Democrat and you feel like you've made a mistake, you do have the ability to change your vote, so to speak.
Things are Omicron is happening, crime is happening. Things are not breaking the way Democrats, and the employment numbers were terrible on Friday, and the market responded. Let me talk to you about Putin, because the NDAA is also in Punchbowl news this morning. The National Defense Authorization Act usually passes every single year. I expect it will pass this year. Do Democrats realize that if Putin invades Ukraine for the second time, 2 Democratic presidents in a row, their credibility will be smashed up beyond repair?
I think there's a growing recognition of the problem in Russia when it comes to Ukraine. I think the defense, to your earlier point, the defense authorization bill is going to be a tough bill to pass. It's really not going to be easy, and there's not much time left. Remember, I mean, I just was looking at the calendar this morning, Hugh, and the House is supposed to leave after this week for the rest of the year. I don't anticipate that's going to happen, but that's what's on the schedule. Yeah, I mean, usually they do that, and it's usually just more hopeful than anything else because they hope to have their work done. I anticipate they're going to be here right up into Christmas, pretty much, or maybe a little bit before. But now there's discussion. It's bad. It's stupid. I don't feel like I'm going out on a limb saying this about attaching the debt limit to the NDAA, which is a really, really bad mistake strategically. Republicans are needed in the House of Representatives to pass the NDAA, and if they don't, if they attach the debt limit, they are not going to be able to pass it. They're just simply not going to be able to pass it. I talked to some people who are friends of the show, who are senators, who are defense hawks, who also say it's epically stupid to attach the debt limit to the NDAA.
Unless Democrats don't care about defense. And there are some Democrats who don't care about defense. Lots of them. The left side of the House caucus would cut defense spending dramatically. However, Angus King is a serious fellow. I mean, Chris Coons is a serious guy when it comes to China and Ukraine. They can't want that to happen.
No, they don't. And by the way, I would say most Democrats in the Senate want the NDAA to pass. And I would say most Democrats in the House want it to pass, if not every Democrat in the House. I think they do take issue with some of the policies, increased defense funding, some of those issues. But I think most of them want it to pass.
So let's finish with the debt limit. The debt limit, Mitch McConnell was adamant in the fall. He has been quiet in December. What are you reading the tea leaves here on the debt limit, Jake Sherman of Punchbowl News?
I think that the debt limit, I think McConnell and Schumer are trying to find a way out. They're trying to cut a deal. We've heard a couple times that McConnell and Schumer are discussing a very long-term increase in the debt limit, potentially until after 2024. I don't know if I believe that. There's basically, I mean, I hate to say this, today is December 6th, right? I mean, we are 9 days away from the so-called X date, that date that the Treasury Department says the Congress needs to lift the debt limit. The Treasury is usually pretty flimsy on those numbers, meaning they change and they underestimate how much money they have so they could get Congress to move. But we haven't seen a plan. This is going to take some time. It's going to take some mental energy, and there's just a lot to do. This is all why, Hugh, I believe that the BBB doesn't pass until 2022, until that election year.
I think you're right. Now, my last question, Jake Sherman. Thanks for your time this morning. Punchbowlnews.com. Get the free newsletter beyond. I think Leader McConnell's the smartest guy the Republicans have. And I believe he realizes that the political atmosphere for Democrats is toxic. They can't recover. So he doesn't want to make any mistakes. The old rule is when your opponents are destroying themselves, don't get involved, right? Isn't that what he's doing?
Correct. Yeah, that is what he's doing. And I think more than anything, McConnell is afraid of a debt default. I mean, I think that I could say that unequivocally. He does not want to default on a debt. Government shutdowns are one thing, debt defaults are another, and he does not want to go there.
I agree. And whatever Leader McConnell comes up with is the right thing for Republicans to do. Jake Sherman, thank you. Follow Jake at Jake Sherman on Twitter. Follow him, punchbowlnews.com. Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt Inside the Beltway Live, joined by Hotline Josh on Twitter. That would be Josh Kraushaar of the National Journal. Good Monday to you, Josh. How are you?
Happy Monday. Good morning, Hugh.
I have been spending most of the show today replaying my interview that I taped late Friday with Michael Schellenberger, the author of San Francisco. It's available over at the Interview with Hugh Hewitt. He wrote San Francisco to warn people about what has happened in the city by the Bay in Seattle and Los Angeles with the homeless. The Build Back Better bill has $170 billion that, as Ricardo in Miami just wrote to me, will just make things worse. That's what Schellenberger thinks, too. Is anyone aware of how bad the impact of that spending will be on homelessness?
Well, Joe Manchin is certainly concerned. I think Kirsten Sinema, she gave an interview to CNN a few days ago where she, again, said she's not committed to supporting it yet and is worried about inflation and a lot of unintended consequences that could come as a result of that bill passing. Look, I've always been pessimistic that it's going to get through Congress and get through the Senate and then the House again with enough votes to pass. You have a political reality that is looking at the state of inflation, looking at the state of the supply chains across the country, and wants to put a pause on some of the big government spending. That's the mood in America right now. And the White House hasn't really adapted their legislative strategy in light of sort of the changed environment around them. So as long as Joe Manchin is saying, I want to pause this legislation until 2022, and he's clearly trying to slow walk it, maybe even scuttle it, and then even if it passes the Senate, you're still going to have to get progressives and moderates to vote again on a reworded, pared back package. So we're going to have to go through that all over again, even if it gets that far. I just think the odds of it passing by the end of the year less than 50-50, and I think if it doesn't get passed by New Year's 2022, the odds get even longer because it's just harder and harder in an election year to get something that big through Congress.
That's the whole bill. I'm looking specifically at the $170 billion of the $2 trillion that is for homeless. There's a media meteor hurtling towards the Beltway, Josh. Sometimes elected officials are the last to know what the American people are watching. They're watching these massive gangs loot high-end stores in California and then be released that night with no bail. They're watching a killer in Waukesha run over his wife and they get released on $1,000 bail. They're looking at school officials in Detroit who did nothing to detain an obviously disturbed and psychotic kid. They're wondering about the collapse in authority. And I don't think Build Back Better has anything to do with restoring the foundation, do you?
No, it doesn't. I mean, it's an economic bill. It's a government spending package. And a lot of the problems in the cities that you mentioned are related to sort of soft on crime, progressive criminal justice policies that have been getting rid of bail in some of those jurisdictions, changing the prosecuting guidelines in cities like Philadelphia, San Francisco, to the DA literally not prosecuting what they would call lower-level crime. That is the very crime we're watching, where people smash up stores in the city and create chaos downtown. That is a huge problem. It may be the Democrats' biggest political problem. When people talk about culture wars and stuff, Hugh, it's a euphemism for a soft-on-crime, just very permissive attitude towards these very issues. In fact, I was struck. Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, was asked about that very issue at a briefing last week, and she said that the root cause of these issues was the pandemic. Well, that's news to a lot of. Yeah, that's right. I mean, she was asked by, I believe it was Peter Doocy of Fox, about the rising crime, the rise in disorder in many of these cities, and she pointed to the pandemic as the issue. I mean, that anyone who's on the ground in, San Francisco, Los Angeles, the pandemic may have a factor, but it's directly related. Anyone in California can tell you it's the DAs who were elected on these very left-wing platforms changing their view of how they sentence bad offenders and their whole view of criminal justice. It's that correlation is there for everyone to see. And, I think there's a bit of denial.
Chesa
the White House on down.
Yeah, the DA in San Francisco, Chesa Boudin, believes in de-incarceration. And in this Build Back Better, I actually read it. There's a prohibition in one of the grants on giving any money to a homeless group that backs the Home to Work program, which puts requirements on homeless aid. You got to go to work. You got to get cleaned up. You got to not use drugs. And the left in Build Back Better prohibits money from going to those groups. It's like they cut out the Salvation Army years ago. They cut out Catholic Charity. I think Democrats in the Senate have got to stop this bill, or they're going to destroy their party. And I think they know that, Josh. Last word to you.
Yeah, I mean, the view that you have to pass it to see what's in it, I don't think that's holding a lot of political water. And let's be real, Joe Biden's job approval rating is stuck in the low 40s. It's trending in the wrong direction. When a president doesn't have political capital, even within his own party, it's tough to get these big bills passed through Congress. And as long as Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema are in the Senate, I think it's going to be challenging to get those votes, no matter what.
Hotline Josh, thank you, my friend. All of you, I'll see you tonight on Special Report with Brett Baer. Make sure you tune in. And I tell you again, the Schellenberger book, San Francisco, is available at Amazon.com. The entire interview I did with him, which I couldn't play with you, it's an entire hour, is posted over at the interview with Hugh Hewitt. My other podcast, Highly Concentrated Hugh, will have on Jake and Josh and everyone else I interviewed, Salena Zito today. And I hope you'll be back tomorrow. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Generalissimo, for the marvelous transcript of the Schellenberger interview, which is now posted at HughHewitt.com, where Angel Tree banner is at the top as well. Please don't forget Angel Tree. Go and be generous, and I'll be back tomorrow.